Hello, I'm Shelley Rothus, and I'm a different kind of victim. Today, we're going to be talking about domestic violence culture. The thing that I want to change it to, from rape culture to domestic violence culture. So far I've described domestic violence culture as to where people automatically assume that a victim doesn't realize that they are being treated in ways that they don't deserve and just tolerate it because they think it's okay that it's happening to them. Now remember, I had to explain what denial actually really is. That even people in the mental health profession don't actually understand. Denial does not mean that a victim doesn't realize that they are being treated in ill ways. Now, what's the new term? Instead of survival mode, or whatever they want to call it, as to surviving as though it's a physical thing that they're doing, when it's actually something that they're conditioned and that they learn themselves in order to what? To avoid extreme emotional pain. So that's why I changed it to conditioned, normalized victimization syndrome. So now I'm going to add something on to domestic violence culture. Now this deals with discrimination too against domestic violence victims. So how is that? Where did I come to see that? That's because I myself experienced it. So who does this to others? Who discriminates and who is a part of domestic violence culture? Are victims a part of it too? Yes, there are many victims of domestic violence whom also are a problem when it comes to domestic violence culture and discrimination against victims of domestic violence. So I'm going to be giving examples as to what I've personally experienced as a victim. Okay, we'll start off with, I did move out one time for a while from my 3 alcoholics. So what was one thing that the mental health field had done as a form of discrimination against victims of domestic violence? Of course, at this time, they didn't see the abuse. Well, they probably seen it, but they ignored it. Like I had stated in other videos, is that's part of the culture as to believing that the parents can do no harm. So anyways, this actually can happen to domestic violence victims too. You know, this was based upon special needs, those with special needs, because, you know, I have epilepsy, and at the time they believed I had a learning disability, also mental illnesses that I was misdiagnosed with based upon the false accusations of my 3 alcoholics. So I needed financial assistance when I first moved out the first time. In order to get that, they wanted me to take budgeting groups, which teaches you how to pay bills, how to budget your money so you don't run out. Well, they automatically assume that a victim doesn't know how to do that just because of their situation. So, do we do this to people that just move out from being a teenager to becoming an adult? Sure, we give them tips and advice, you know, suggestions when they need it, but they already know how to do it, you know. Just like a child can learn how to manage an allowance. When they get allowance money, they can manage of how they spend it in order for it to last. We learn these things at a young age. Also, another thing I'd like to point out is that most people automatically, you know, assume that we learn most things in the home with the ones that raised us. And that's not true. I've learned a lot of things outside my three alcoholics, home or out of their control. I learned many things. I actually know more things in a better way than those people that weren't in my situation, certain people. Actually, I've given advice and helped others, even during the time that I was still with my three alcoholics. So, as for the budgeting groups, how did I do in them? People are probably going to assume that I needed them, because I'm not, going to know how to do it because of the situation I'm in, guess what? They put me in those groups, and right away they realized I already know how to do all that stuff. I was doing better than people that had already lived on their own for many years, several, and actually doing it twice as better as them. Yeah, exactly. They told me, the people in charge of that place, that mental health agency, they said, wow, you could actually be teaching this group, So they just let me slide. They said, just go. You don't need this group. I was like, okay, So what's the thing that does hold victims back when it comes to conditioned normalized victimization syndrome? So for me, I've stated several times that I was not physically abused. I was emotionally, psychologically, verbally, and mentally abused. That doesn't mean that I'm not able to or don't know how to do things that the average person would know how to do based upon my age and whatnot. And most people assume that, believe it or not. Even people who were victims themselves assume that. And so what's the next situation? I'm going to give one as to when I was trying to escape during that time. During the time I was trying to escape, I had stayed at an outlet mall during the day. And that was one way that I did it in order to keep myself sane mentally. Because what happens when you encounter an extreme amount of stress? You can break down. Anybody can. And I myself didn't want that to happen again. Because, like I stated, the victim during the conditioned normalized victimization syndrome, what do they try to do? They try to avoid extreme painful abuse as for punishment and consequences based upon not following the orders, the control of that victim's abusers. So, what happened next? Now, during the time I was trying to escape, I just stated that I needed to keep my sanity so I didn't break down. So, during that time, there was a man in a truck, and he was stalking me. He actually pulled over one time when I was exercising and walking, which I did for anxiety issues that helped me, and offered to give me a ride. Of course, I said no. Just like when you're kids, you learn not to just go up to anybody, don't talk to strangers, blah, blah, blah. So this is where rape victims of domestic violence and other victims of domestic violence, not related to sexual assault, but other types of abuse, even emotional, psychological, verbal, and mental abuse, such as myself, can actually relate to each other. So, what's in the rape culture, as I now call domestic violence culture? People will say, well, what was that victim doing out at night? And what were they doing alone in a area where there wasn't that many people around? Blah, blah, blah. All those myths and BS. Because most rapes are planned. It doesn't just happen where, they, all the time where, somebody jumps out of a bush and, somebody's raped. They say, how stupid. They should have known better. The same thing happens to, that's right, people of different types of abuse. So after that happened, I had let people know that happened. Of course, I know that's possible happening to anybody in that type of situation. There's sickos out there. And even a victim of domestic violence realizes that. I myself, I'm not the type even though I myself am a victim of sexual assault more than 3 times, I'm not gonna live in fear. Because I realize that I could get raped anywhere. I could get raped in my own home. I could be sexually assaulted anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's nighttime, daytime, where I'm located. It can happen anywhere. And it's never it's never whose fault? The victim's fault. It's never their fault, like many people will automatically say. So again, who else blames the victim? That's right. Other victims of sexual assault actually blame the victim for how and why they were sexually assaulted. Just like I shown in the bullying cult clans, them putting down people of sexual assault that were also victims of sexual assault. And what else happened? They also used my abuse that happened to me as a way to insult me that wasn't based upon sexual assault and domestic violence. So, what was the incident that happened during the time I was trying to escape when that man was stalking me? And he ended up coming to a store where I stopped at to get a drink from after working out. And again was trying to get me to come to him. I, of course, didn't come to him and gave him a dirty look and turned away. And I had shared this on social media. And guess what? Another victim of domestic violence who had volunteered at, DV places based upon sexual assault victims where they go to get help for it, had, talked to me like I'm some kind of child that doesn't know any better. She said, Shelley, be careful, and da-da-da-da. Are you kidding me? I mean, I was 47 years old. People automatically assume, even victims themselves, this person is a victim of domestic violence themselves, assumed that I didn't know that this is possible to happen. Oh my goodness. I mean, that is so insulting and demeaning to a victim of domestic violence. That could be insulting to anybody. So, what does that also do? That's goes into domestic violence culture, as I call it now. And that's exactly what we go through too. Even people who are abused in ways of emotional, verbal, mental, psychological abuse. So that was insulting to me, and I didn't appreciate it. And I let that person know that. I'm actually educated based upon sexual assault and the offenders and the victims and what they go through, the culture of it, the discrimination. But one thing in the mental health field that they didn't really go into based upon domestic violence is that rape culture also applies to all forms of domestic violence victims. So the next example I'm going to give is based upon a person who is not only a victim, but also in the mental health field and has a higher degree than me. So now what happened there? Now, I had gone out to eat with this person. This was during the time that I was trying to escape. And I had stated that I had stayed at an outlet mall to keep my mental sanity. So, what does every person need to do? They need to eat. So, yeah, I went out to eat and everything else just to feed myself while I stayed at this outlet mall to stay away from the stress of my 3 alcoholics during that time. So what did this person say to me that was what I call discrimination against those who are victims of abuse? That goes along with domestic violence culture. Oh my goodness, I could not believe it. They actually told me, they said, you realize that you're not going to be able to spend money and go out to eat like you do. Oh my goodness. Like I'm, dumb and don't realize that, things aren't always affordable, and that, once you have bills and whatnot, that you have to budget your money. Oh my goodness, that was so insulting. And they said that a couple times. And this person is in the mental health field and is also a victim of abuse by, several times by family members and also intimate partners. So that is, as you can see, that's a part of not, rape culture, but also it should be domestic violence culture, not rape culture. That's why I want to change it to domestic violence culture. Because of that actually happening, I'm sure it happens to other victims. And I'm just putting it out there to show that this actually happens and it should stop. Because what does that do to a victim? That actually is enabling and encouraging what their abusers had done to them. Conditioned, like I had gone over, is that a victim is conditioned based upon the abuse from their abusers to what? They try to make them believe that victim believe themselves that they're not capable or able to do certain things. What? In order to keep control over them. Now, this is where I had stated that the victim knows how to do these things. They realize that they're not being treated in ways that they don't deserve those ways, to be treated in those ways. I knew that. I'm not some, idiot, that doesn't know these, basic things that the average person, knows. So what else did happen? Okay. When I had first moved out, there was that, one in-person male that came over to introduce themselves, hi, I'm Joe, I'm on my way to the mental institute, and I was just wondering if you masturbate. So what did somebody that works in a field that is pretty closely, they're not educated in the mental health field, but it's pretty close to it. They said, I'm just worried about you, that you don't, as though I don't realize that these things can happen when you live on your own, or it can happen anywhere. So I was like, so what had happened? It's not my fault. Be careful, oh my goodness. I mean, we shouldn't have to live in fear and, blame victims, God, that was dumb that you did this, you let them in your place, or even open the door. Give me a break. I'm not going to live in fear just because there's the possibility of something happening. It's never my fault. I'm not going to stop living my life in ways that make me happy just because there's sickos out there, self-centered pricks that want to do harmful things to get their, power and control benefit of, feeling good. No, that's not going to happen. So, what else happened? What else did people assume about me after I had got out and knew about my situation? They assumed that I didn't even have a driver's license. Seriously, you know how many people actually asked me if I even have a driver's license and know how to drive a car? Oh my goodness. I'm like, are you kidding me? I was basically, is what my therapist said, was held hostage for most of my life, but I was not a hermit. I went to school, I learned things, I was, in social situations, so I was able to learn things and know many things. I may not have done them, as often as others because of the situation I was in, but I'm still able to learn, and I still did. I wasn't, in some basement since I was born and just stayed in a basement my whole life. Oh my goodness. I mean, even people that were victims of abuse themselves, there were certain people that actually were victims of abuse themselves that made certain assumptions, such as that. And I was, that's insulting too. So that's part of what? Domestic violence culture. Just like assuming that someone doesn't realize the possibility of being sexually assaulted, based on certain circumstances that people automatically believe is how it always happens, how a person always gets sexually assaulted. Like it happens mainly at nighttime, or when they're in a place that doesn't have many other people around, things like that, where those are actually myths. They're not actually facts. Or it happens by people that are strangers. Again, a myth. And that's, again, where I've stated in other videos, is that why family abuse gets away with it the most, is based upon those myths, part of domestic violence culture. So, what's another thing that happened? So during the time I was looking for a job, I had people that were supportive in the right way and the wrong way. So what are things that people assumed based upon that? Is that they assumed that I've never had a job. They assumed that I don't know how to socially interact with others in ways that would be beneficial as for me getting a job, as to knowing these basics. And even people that they themselves were victims of abuse assume this. How I look, even, coloring my hair, saying that's not appropriate for a job interview, how I talk to people and interact. I've been socially out there. I've been to college. I'm educated. And I've also been trained in how to have job interviews and how to act at the job and all of that. I've had jobs before. So that was extremely demeaning and insulting. I'm not a potato. I wasn't a hermit just because of the situation I was in. I do know how to budget my money. I do know how to interact with others. I do know how to work in work ethics, how to get a job, how to talk to people in ways that are acceptable and respectable. I'm not a person without a brain. So, as you can see, this has happened quite often, and this is something that we should really pay attention to, because what does that do? That encourages and enables the abuse to continue happening to that victim, because people that actually believe that gives the heads up, for those that are actually still in the situation, the abuse situation with their abusers. It actually gives the abusers the upper hand and enables them, because they'll use that against the victim. Just like my 3 assholics always were able to make people even in the mental health field believe that I'm unable, I'm not capable, I'm dumb, I'm not able to learn, I'm a twit, that's how they kept me under their wrath of control, power and control. And were unable to do it based upon imbeciles that actually went along with their lies about me. When actually, like I've stated, I'm actually smarter than the 3 of the assholics put together. That's right. Even though I was basically held hostage for most of my life, I'm actually smarter than many other people. Not trying to brag, but I realize that now. I used to believe that I was dumb, I'm unable, and whatnot. So how do you support a victim in a way that brings that out of them? I already know how to do these things. I know that I'm able to. So, one thing that I told people that I didn't know how to do, but guess what? This is something that even people that done it before wouldn't know how to do. So when I moved in, the oven that I had, the stove, the oven that was with it, it didn't have what features they have now. Like, it doesn't show you what temperature the oven is at. You know, it's a really old, cheap type of stove that I have that came with the apartment. So my friend Nina is the one that taught me how to use it. She knew I was afraid because when I lived with the three alcoholics, my mother was a control freak over how I cooked and what I did in the kitchen and whatnot. So yeah, I felt a little bit nervous because I was conditioned, and I myself, felt that, a little bit fearful. So the way that my friend Nina supported me is she showed me how to do it. She knew I already knew how to do it. And that's what she built confidence in me. She knew I am able to use the oven, that I'm not an idiot that wouldn't know how to do it. But she was there for emotional support and building my confidence that I can even do other things just by showing me how to do it and having me do it with her. That's how you support a victim such as myself, who was in a situation as to where their abusers had raised them to believe, and that's how they taught them to think that they're not able to do things. So she did it in a proper way that was supportive, that built my confidence, because what does a victim need is emotional support to build their confidence within themselves, to bring out what they already know inside their head how to do, or even are able to learn how to do it. So it's very important to support victims in ways that will be effective and actually benefit them in more ways after even doing little things to build their confidence and not bring them down. And what do you do when you bring them down? And it goes along with believing myths such as, I'm not able to, drive, and I'm not able to learn how to drive, I may not be able to because, they assume that I never did it, or I'm not able to have a job because, I've never been social, I don't know how to be social with people. I mean, use common sense and also be respectful of victims of abuse and not discriminate against them based upon their situation. That's a huge problem throughout our society, not just the mental health field, our whole society. And again, even victims of abuse do these things, as I've just proven. Not just the mental health field, but actual victims of abuse. So, I'm going to end it here. I just wanted to bring this out so that people can be more aware. And I'd like to go more deep with this based upon my personal story that I'm writing, to really show these things to help not only current victims, but future victims of domestic violence. So I'm going to end it here, and I hope to see you again. I'm Shelley Rothus, and I'm a different kind of victim. I'll see you next time.